Okay, so tonight, welcome everybody. Um, we're going to try to discuss, you know, the basics of the malacha of borer. Um, that's on the game plan for tonight. So first, we're going to define what borer is. Um, borer literally means to separate. So one of the malachas is separating things, one thing from another. So there's um, the most important thing to know about borer separating is that there's three requirements for in order for borer to be done, separating to be done in a permissible way. And we're gonna get back to these, but this is the most important thing to know. These three conditions. Number one is ocha mitoch psoles, which means you have to take the good from the bad. Number two is you have to do it biyad, which means with your hand as opposed to with you know a tool, a dish made for separating, for filtering. The last thing is you have to do it miyad, which means to be for use right away. That's the main thing to know about borer. But what we're gonna discuss tonight, this is just the outline of the shears. First, we're going to discuss, how can you separate when you don't even need those conditions? Meaning, like it's not even called separating because what you have is might not even be a mixture. And this is not even like a Boer question because this is just like not called separating, and it's going to be permissible even without these three requirements. So that's going to be part one, and then part two is we're going to go through each of those three conditions. What does it exactly mean to take the good from the bad? What does it exactly mean to that you need to use your hand? Can you maybe could you use a fork? Is that called your hand? And then number three is, what counts as immediate use? What if I'm making a meal and I have guests over and I need to you know, prepare some food? Is that called immediate if I'm making it right before the guests come? So that's the discussion. So part one, right? What's not even called borer? Not even separating? So the key to understand is that it's only called separating if what you have in front of you is a mixture. But if you don't have a mixture, it's what we'd call a taroves, a mixture. If you don't have that, then there's not going to be borer. The Beer Halacha explains that, things stacked on top of each other, if you just have things stacked on top of each other, let's say you have a pile of books, right? By the way, borer could be for food. It's most commonly for food, but m most of our opinion that borer separating um can be done even, would be prohibited even not for food. So let's say you have like let's say you have a pile of socks, right? And you want to separate, the whites from the darks. Um, or like I'm saying just clothes in general, the whites from the colors, right? So that could be borer. So but anyways, it's not, let's say you have a pile of books, right? So a pile of books, if you want to organize them, that might be borer. So the Bir Halacha explains that things stacked on top of each other, that's not called a mixture, that's just called a stack. Right? A stack is not a mixture. So that's always the question, is that when you look at something in front of you, you have to, in order for it to be a problem, because a borer, it has to be first be called a taroves, it has to be first called a mixture. And if it's not called a mixture, um, then there's not going to be any issue because of borer. Additionally, it has to be different type of things that are together, right? If you have a, just say you have a bowl of apples and you want to take some apples out, but no apples, and you don't really care because they're all the same, right? Then that's not called separating. You're just, that there's no separating one from the other. You're just taking apples out of a bowl. So the Rama says that if two types of fish, if you have let's say you have a plate and you have two different types of fish. Let's say you have like a gefilte fish, and you have salmon, right? So those are two types of fish. So he says that is called two different types of food, right? And to take one, separate. Let's say you want all the gefilte fish out, that would be borer potentially, right? Unless you do it in a permissible way. But if you just say, let's say you have like a big pieces of chicken and small pieces of chicken, where they're different pieces, and you might even want the big pieces as opposed to the small pieces. He says that's called all the same thing. And then That's not even borer. You could do it however you want. There the Taz, there are those who argue on the Ramah. He says, no, that's not true. If they're, whenever you want one over the other, maybe that should be borer. So some argue on this. So that's a discussion thing to keep something to keep in mind. There's discussion grilled chicken versus baked chicken. Is that all called the same thing? Um, Maybe yes, maybe no. It depends who you ask, right? And dark chicken versus white chicken, right? So maybe that's called all the same thing, or maybe it's not. Depends on which postik. Rev Yashiv said chicken is chicken, dark and white, there's no difference. You're not really, so you want to really be separated from the other. Others disagree. Maybe it depends if maybe if you're picky, right? For you really care about, you never eat white chicken. Okay, so then maybe it's called separating for you, and then maybe it gets into the discussion of border. Also, there's a discussion if something's halachically different than something else. Like let's say you have a box of matzahs, right? And if you want to make hamoti on your matzahs, you need a full piece of matzah. You shouldn't do it on a broken piece of matzah. So the broken pieces are different halachically in your mind, right? Because you want the full pieces of matzah. So are you able to organize them out? Rabbeinu Tam thinks that halachically, if something is psoles, that's psoles means no good. Psoles means bad. If Rabbeinu Tam thinks if halachically it's not as good, then it could be an issue, and it would be considered psolas, not good, and maybe then it would be borer. The Ramban thinks halachically what you consider halachically as it doesn't have an effect. Um, so that's other things to keep in mind. Also, the Shulchan Aruch, he writes that if he has a case if one has water with you have a bunch of stuff floating in your water, so he says you could separate it on Shabbos since really you would drink it out or drink it anyways. The Mishnah Berurah explains that since most people would drink it anyways with this sediment inside of it, that's not really called a taroves, that's not called a mixture, and that's called he said that's just like cutting like a food in half because you would eat the whole thing really. So that becomes important when you're talking about like a water filter. People who have water filters like either type. So many argue that since someone would drink it anyways, you would drink water even if it wasn't filtered most of the time. So then it's not really called separating because there's no actual difference to you. And that's not even a borer problem. There's also a more well-known kula, a heter, by written in the Shmir Shabbos Kelchasa, so from Rav Shlomo Zalman, that he says it's not a problem to undo a taroves. I don't fully understand this, but he says, let's say you have a bunch of forks and knives, and you'd want to organize them. So what do you do? So he says you can just, dump the whole thing on the floor, and then they're all spread apart. And if they're all spread apart and distinguishable, then I could pick them up one by one. And then that's not called separating because, it's not a mixture anymore. It's not a taroves. Um, and Rav Moshe said that's also right. So that's another thing to not even make it into borer. Um, and the Shmir Shabbos for Shlomo Zalman, he also says that, like, let's say he goes in the same case. He says this. Let's say you have a bunch of forks and knives. He says to pick up a utensil and then wash it off is not called separating either. Why not? Sounds like it could be separating. He says because the prohibition of borer separating is only when you're taking it only for the purpose of separating. But let's say you would pick up a fork to wash it off, right? So you're not doing it to separate. You're doing it to wash it off, and then it's not going to be an issue. And then the final last point before we get into, the three conditions of what makes, let's say we do have what we think is a mixture and there are no ways around it, and this is a mixture, you need to separate it. And so then you need the three conditions. So there's one more thing before that could help you out. Um, is that this is a comment by the Taz. The Taz writes that let's say a fly falls in your soup. So what should you do? He says, don't just take the fly out of the soup because then that might be borer. That might be called separating. So what you should do is take some of the soup with the fly. And then you're not doing anything, right? Because you're not removing waste. You're removing waste and good. right? You're removing waste and good together. That's not called separating. And the Mishnah Berurah, he paskins like this. He says that that is correct. You should do this, and this would be a good leniency. This is something you could do, and this wouldn't be a question of borer, and you would not be violating this malacha. So there's a little bit of a debate um, about what the Taz means. So that's the Mishnah verse seems to say, and also the Pri Megadim, he says that seems to be of the opinion that what the Taz means by this is that anytime you take food, in addition, you take good food that you want, in addition to the psolas, the bad that you don't want, that you're taking it out together, that's not called borer because you're not separating bad from good, you're separating it all together. The Chazon Ish, he has a little bit of a different understanding of this Taz. He says that's not a leniency for borer to take good with bad. That's still called separating. He says the reason why this is permitted is because you're you know it's no longer a mixture, meaning the fly is only mixed in with a little bit of soup. So if you're going to take the fly with a little mixture of soup, right, you're not breaking apart a mixture. That's his understanding. So many explain this machlokes between the Chazon Ish and the way the Mishnah Berurah and the Pri Megadim, they explain that they're really arguing about, what exactly is borer. Chazon Ish seems to be of the opinion that um, that borer really means, it doesn't mean just removing waste from food. It means anything done to fix the food, right? He uses the words of they use the words of tikkun ochel, fixing the food. So by taking out fly in addition with soup, you're still fixing your bowl of soup. I mean, probably most people wouldn't eat it, they'd probably go in the garbage. But theoretically, if you would eat that soup, right now you have fixed your bowl of soup, and that's how he views the malach of borer. By the Mishnah Berurah and the Pri Megadim, they would seem to be of the opinion that it's the problem with borer is not fixing food, it's removing waste. So if you're going to remove waste in addition to soup, right, you're not really just removing waste. So therefore you didn't even do borer. So all those that we've discussed so far, right? But maybe it's not a mixture, and if it's not a mixture, there's no borer. Or if you take bad with a little bit of good, it's also not borer because you're not separating. In all those cases, you don't need the three conditions. When you need the three conditions is if you have something which you view as a mixture and you just want to take one thing out and you're not able to take it with a little bit of good as well. And so if that's the case, you need all three of these conditions. So the first one is you have to take ochel mitoch psolas. You have to take good from the bad. Um, so why does that help? Why is it taking good from the bad help? So the Ran explains when you take good from the bad, ochel mitoch psolas, so that just becomes, that becomes just the normal way you would eat something. And so therefore that's going to be permitted. That's not called separating. That's just called, the normal way that you would eat a food. That's how the Ran explains it. In a similar note, the Mishnah Berurah in Shar Tzion explains that you're removing a pit of a plum. That you take a plum and you just remove the pit out there. So seemingly that's taking the bad, right? You're taking the pit out of the plum. So isn't that taking the bad from the good? So he says that's permitted because there's no other way to eat it, right? So since it's the normal way you would eat a food, that 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 would be permitted. But the point is that the reason why taking good from the bad is because it seems to be the normal way you would do something. That's how the Ran understands it. But the question is, one question to understand is, what does it mean to take the good from the bad? Um, like let's say for example, um you have a can of tuna fish, or if you have you open a yogurt and there's water on top of the yogurt. Um, so you want to remove the the water that's on top from the rest of the yogurt. So what are you going to do? You're going to go to the sink or go to the trash can. You're going to pour the water out. So did I just take the good from the bad, or did I take the bad from the good? right? The water comes out. The water is what's leaving my hands. So maybe I just took bad from the good, but right, what's left in my hand is the yogurt. So maybe I took the good from the bad. So that's a machlokas naturally. Which is correct. The Magen Avraham says whatever leaves your hand, um, is what's called what you're taking, right? So the Magen Avraham would be of the opinion is that if I take the yogurt and I dump out water, so then I would be taking bad from good, and that would be a problem, right? I'd be taking psolas mito chochel, and I wouldn't fulfill that condition. But Shulchan Aruch Harav, he disagrees, and he says, no, whatever's remaining in your hand is called what you are taking. So therefore, in that case, right, if I dumped water out, right, I would be left with just yogurt, which is what I want. So I'd be taking good from bad, and then indeed, I would fulfill that condition. Um, so that's a little bit of discussion about Ochal Mitoch Ptos, which one is correct. Seems to be a Machokas. Um, so probably ask someone if that comes up. But that's a discussion. The point is though, take from the good from the bad. Um, the second condition that you have to be aware of or remember is that it needs to be done biyad, meaning your hand. The Gemara in the Shulchan Aruch writes that to use like a filter is going to be prohibited midaraisa on a biblical level, and to use a what the Gemara says a knon and a tamchoi is going to be prohibited only, albeit rabbinically. So Mishnah Berurah explains, he says, what is a knon and what is a tamchoi? A knon, he says, is a funnel, and a tamchoi is, he says, a big tray to spread out different beans. And so that's going to be an issue to use to separate something because, maybe it's not made specifically for uh for well, there's a discussion. Why is it exactly that this tray, the assumption of the Gemara is that the funnel and the tray, at least they may not be made to use to specifically to filter or to separate something, but they certainly are used or might help in the use. So the discussion, why exactly is a tray? What does a tray do that would make it sort of even relate to separating? So that's a machlokas among the poskim, the later poskim, Rav Moshe Feinstein, um, and the Orach of Shabbos in the name of Rosh Zalman and the Chazon Ish. Rav Moshe says that he defines like this: although it does not do the sorting, the tray doesn't actually sort, but it makes the sorting easier to do. So anytime you would use a kli, you'd use a vessel or a tool that helps in the sorting, um, that's not called, you're no longer done biyad, right? You're not using your hand, and then you're not going to fulfill that condition, and it's going to be prohibited. So any sort of thing which helps in the sorting, that's how Rav Moshe defines it. The Aruch Shabbos, he disagrees. He says no. He says it's any sort of vessel that's normally used in the process of sorting, um, even if it doesn't help, right? As long as it's normally used. So, you think about like well the other yeah. So the other thing to mention though is that come back to that in 1 second, but it's important to mention that if you have a tool that doesn't really necessarily help in the separation, but you're just using it because it's more convenient. So both of them would agree, both Rav Moshe and the Aruch Shabbos would agree that that's still called biyad. So for example, like a fork, this is important to know that a fork, right? You might think that a fork, if I use a fork and separate, let's say I have a salad and I want the sweet potatoes from the salad, let's just say. And so, you definitely have a mixture here. So you're going to need to fulfill the three conditions, right? So the first condition is you take the good from the bad. So you want the sweet potatoes, so you're doing that. Second condition is you have to use biyad, meaning your hand. So could you use a fork? So the the poskim understand that a fork it's still called using your hand because the fork is not helping you sort, and it's also not necessarily even normally used in the process of sorting because um it's it's you're using the fork because it's more convenient. You don't want to get your hands dirty, right? Not because you could separate in the same way even if you use your hand. It's more of a convenience thing. But where this machlokas does come up between Rav Moshe and the Orchel Shabbos is if you have some sort of tool, some sort of like vessels or kalim that are do help, but are not normally used. So for example, like let's say people have in their salt shakers, they have rice, I guess. So, Rav Moshe would say then you can't use that because it's helping the cap of the salt shaker helps in the separating from of the rice um from the salt. But the Orchel Shabbos would say that is called mutter because it's not normally used. Or if you have a pitcher with a narrow spout that prevents ice from coming out. Um, so well, first of all, this might not even be a taroves, but if you hold that it is a mixture, so Moshe would say that's called prohibited since it's in a kli that helps right with the sorting, right? It helps separate the ice from the water. But according to the Orchel Shabbos, you would say no, it's not like a normal tool that's used to sort. It just happens to sort and helps sort, right? So that would be a bit of of the discussion. But the fork seemingly be permitted according to everyone, and that would still be called using biyad, using your hand. And then finally, the last condition that you need in order to separate something, Shabbos is the heter or the condition, sorry, the condition of miyad. It needs to be done for immediate use. And the Ron again explains that why is something done for immediate use? Why should that change anything? He says since if it's done for immediate use, he says that's called a normal way to eat. But if you're separating for right away, that's just called eating, right? So that's why it would help. But what exactly does it mean to do something for immediate use? Does it need to be right away? Like 5 seconds, and then that's all you have. Um, so there are different opinions for this. Um, the Beis Yosef quotes from Rabbeinu Yerucham. He says, if it's done for what he calls oso seuda, that meal, if it's done for the next meal, it's going to be permitted. But if it's for a different meal, it is prohibited. So that would mean, according to this opinion, anything you're doing for the next meal that's upcoming is going to be called immediate use. So once, let's say you have let's say the Shabbos, right? It's Friday night. You finish your meal pretty early, and you want to set the table for the next day, right? So and there's some things you want to separate. So would that be called doing it miyad? So according to this opinion, right, it's for the next meal. The next meal you're gonna have is Shabbos lunch. So that's called miyad according to Rabbeinu Yerucham. But Rabbeinu Hananel, he disagrees. He says, no, Oso Seuda, when they're all trying to understand this phrase of Oso Seuda. That's a comment made by the Ran who quotes the Ra. He says to eat right away, what we call miyad or la alter, well, means the same thing, it means for immediate use. He says Oso Seuda for that meal. So it's all a discussion about what Oso Seuda that meal means. So Rabbeinu Hananel says, no, that means you have to be sitting in already in the meal. Right, so if you're sitting already in the meal, then you could separate for that meal. But if you're not sitting ready for that meal, then that's not called doing for immediate use, and you would not fulfill this condition. The Rabban, he understands that it's just the separating that can be done immediately on that spot. Um, that's what he says. You basically can separate to be done to use right away, right? But anything done for more than right away, immediate use, is not called miyad, is not called the alter or immediate, and do not fulfill the condition. And then finally, yeah, the opinion of the Mordechai, which again the Beis Yosef quotes, and he says once it's after he says he's in line for with the Rabbeinu Yerucham, anything done for the next meal, right? For the next meal would be called still immediate use, but he says once it's more than an hour long, that's that it says la'achar shah, so that after an hour, that's not called immediate use anyway. Um, so it's even Mordechai would say you basically have an hour in advance of the next meal. The Ramah says anything done, the Ramah writes anything done for that Suda or Suda, but again, it's ambiguous what he means. So, there are different, it seems like there's four different opinions about what exactly it means to do immediate use. So Rav Moshe has a tshuva, and it seems like most people um, agree with Rav Moshe and think this is a good way to measure it. Rav Moshe says that even when the Mordechai says anything done for more than a meal, so for more than 1 hour is not called immediate use anymore. So it doesn't really mean 60 minutes. It's not really 1 hour. It means the amount of time normal for a person to prepare the meal. So it's basically the what Moshe is saying is that you could separate for in advance of the meal any normal amount of time that you need to prepare. But anything more or anything that you would do in between, right? That's that's not for a normal amount of time to prepare for the meal. That's not called immediate use anymore. That's not called the altar or miyad, and you would not fulfill this condition. That would seem to be the understanding of what exactly miyad, what immediate use means. So just to summarize, and then we'll finish for the night. Borer is called separating. It's one of the malachos. Um, Borer is only an issue when you have a mixture, right? So if there's not a mixture, there's no borer. And you can undo the mixture to make it not a mixture. And it's only an issue when it's separating. Also, it's only an issue if you're actually separating good from bad. But if you're separating something with good, right, with the fly in the soup, but you're taking a fly with soup, that's not called even separating. But once you have a mixture and you want to actually take something from something else, so now there are three conditions you need to follow. You need to take ochal mitoch psol, that's good from bad. You need to do it biyad, meaning with your hands. We say that means even a fork if it doesn't actually aid in the removing of or in the separating, that's still called with using your hand, and then it needs to be done miyad for immediate use. And we said immediate use, according to Rav Moshe Feinstein's understanding, means the normal amount of time to prepare in advance of the activity you're doing, which is most likely in the advance of preparing for a meal. Okay, so we'll stop there if anyone has any questions.
So this is not just for